Hello and welcome back to part 29 of my journey towards my Bachelor's of Science Information Technology degree from Western Governors University. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about Linux Foundations, which is class number C851. This particular class is worth 3 credit units. So Linux Foundations is actually an external certification class, which means you have to pass a certification to pass the class. So in this particular case, it's the Linux Essentials exam from LPI, which is the Linux Professional Institute. So in full disclosure, those that have been watching the video series will know that I did not pass this class on the first attempt. In fact, it took me 2 attempts to finally pass it. So for the first attempt, I used Western Governors University's material that they provide, and that's, as always, provided by uCertify. So it's the usual fare. It's a pre-assessment. There's learning material, I think 15 chapters in total and an appendix. There's labs, there's free practice tests, and also a prep engine. So there's quite a bit there. And, I did go through that material. Also, for the first attempt, I went out and purchased the Udemy, or Jason Dion's Udemy Linux Essentials exam material. This particular class had about 7.5 hours worth of video content, which I thought would be quite cool for this particular subject because it is quite dry and sometimes watching video is a little easier than reading. And there was also a couple of practice exams that came with it and a couple of other downloadable resources as well, which were fairly useful. So using that material, for me, first time, unfortunately, wasn't enough to pass. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about what I scored and what happened a little bit later in this video. So the second time I added another resource, and I actually did some research on this, and I think this is what you should use personally on top of possibly what Western Governors University provide. And it's the LPI official site. So LPI is Linux Professional Institute, and they're the people that actually are writing this exam. This is their exam. Now, if you go out to their website, you can find the exam objectives, which is, if those of you who watched any of my videos previously will know that I think it's a huge deal. You always want to look at the exam objectives because the bottom line is it's going to tell you what you're going to be tested on. And that information's out there and it's quite clear. The other thing they have is free learning material. So this isn't going to cost you anything. And it's quite in depth. They break down each of the different chapters and you can test yourself along the way as well. I would thoroughly recommend that you do that. By following that learning material, for me, that's how I passed the exam fairly comfortably on the second attempt. Again, I'm going to put all the links to these different learning materials in the description below, but I would strongly recommend you take a look at that, at least overview before you take the final exam. Now, I do want to mention just quickly about the Jason Dion's Udemy material. I've always been a big fan of his content, but for this particular exam, I'm going to be totally honest with you, I thought it was light. It wasn't in-depth enough. This, even though it's a base level, they call it like an entry-level Linux exam, it's actually quite detailed, and there is actually quite a lot to learn. I felt Jason's a great teacher, and his videos are very clear, but I felt the practice tests and the actual material he covered was very high level, and it gave you a really good overview of Linux, but I don't think it really dug deep enough. So that's just my personal opinion. So let's take a quick look at the different areas of study for this particular class. So hopefully I'm putting them up on the screen for you now. And as you can see, there's 5 key areas. So each one of these are different and they're important. And as you go through the different learning material, a lot of the material is going to focus back in one of these 5 areas. There is some overlap here as well. The key things I'm going to talk to you about is probably topic 3 and topic 5. Because they're the ones for me, when I think back on my actual exam, that I will probably ask the most questions about. So topic 3 is the power of command line. So Linux has its own commands, and they can be very simple things like listing the directory of a directory of what the files are, creating a new user, changing a password, listing processors, checking memory, all these kind of things. Very standard to what you may have seen in a Windows or a Mac operating system. Topic 5 is security of file permissions. This is changing things like making the read, write, and executables on the different files or the groups, etc. And this is quite important and it goes into quite a lot of detail. And like I said, you'll get some of these questions on your test. So overall, you are going to be asked questions about every single one of these sections. But I wanted to point this out for you. One key thing here, each of these different areas are weighted. And this is a little unique to exams. And what I mean by weighted is each section is actually worth a little more than others. So for example, topic 1, a lot of the areas in there is only actually worth 1 or weighted 1. Why? Things like the power of the command line, a lot of those sections are worth 3 and 4. So from what I could tell, looking at the exam objectives, and this is where I'm getting this information from, and again, I'll put that in the description for you, you'll see the different weights. So what that really means is these areas are actually worth more in the exam. A question getting right on that particular section is worth more than, one of the weighted 1 questions from maybe topic 1, if that makes any sense at all. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I did not pass this exam the first time. And when I got my final result, I was kind of surprised I failed because I felt I did quite well. But after talking to my mentor about my first test, if you like, I realized that I probably got a lot of the lower weighted questions right and probably the more important weighted questions wrong. And that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't pass, which is a little frustrating because, at the end of the day, I think I had enough to pass, but I clearly didn't. So that is worth noting. So please make sure you look at the exam objectives and really, really focus on those areas that are weighted highest, because they will give you the best chance to pass because you'll get more points for getting those questions right. I hope that makes sense. So let's talk about the actual exam itself. Well, first of all, you have the option either to take it online through Pearson VUE, or you can take it in one of the local test centres. It's up to you. So for me, I took mine online like I have done for all the other exams in this particular degree programme. It's only 40 questions long and it's only 60 minutes. So quite a quick and short exam by all accounts. Now, all the questions, for the most part, are multiple choice, one of the 4 options. Now, there are several questions, and that's certainly what my experience was in both times I took this, where you're going to have to put in a 1-word answer. So they'll ask you a question, there'll be an area to type your answer, and that's that simple. So just really be careful, follow the instructions, and you should be to go. But there's nothing more than that. There's no drag or drop questions or simulations or anything like that. So it's fairly straightforward the way it's set out. Of course, your questions are going to be from a variation of the 5 main topics that we talked about previously. And the key thing here to remember, though, is the weighted part. Again, look back at the exam objectives to see which ones, but every question is weighted slightly different. Now, the other key thing I want to talk to you about is the questions where you might get to choose more than one answer. So they are multiple choice, but you've seen them in the practice exams. You might get to say that the question might be something like, pick 2 of the following choices. Now you pick 2, click submit next and move on. Now, what I found after speaking to my mentor, because I was concerned, after thinking I did quite well in the first exam, I didn't. And I think the reason why is to get the answer right to the question, I think you have to get both of them. So on these multiple choice ones, I don't think there's any partial credit. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, I wasn't able to 100% verify that with my mentor, but we talked about the exam and she kind of felt that was the case as well. So all I'm saying to you is remember they're weighted and remember that you probably need to get both on those multiple choices questions to get the question correctly. So let's take a moment to look at my first attempt. So this exam was on the 5th of February. And as you can see, hopefully I'll put this up on the screen for you now, I did fail with a score of 490, pass mark of course being 500, so pretty close. Now the cool thing about this exam report that you get, it will break it down for you percentages for the 5 key topics. So looking at this right now, you can see that I did pretty good on topic 1, 100%, right? You can't do much better than that. But obviously topic 5, I need some serious work. Now the reason I'm showing you this here is I want to give you a quick tip. Now, hopefully you don't have this problem and you won't need to worry about this, but if like me, you do fail this exam, I would do this immediately. Try to get over the initial disappointment, grab a piece of paper, and once the exam ends, write down as much of the exam as you can remember. Okay? And the reason you're doing that is you're just kind of doing a brain dump. What do I remember from the exam? I don't know. There was a question about adding new users or changing passwords, or there was a question about Ubuntu and what version or what operating system is is a preference for this particular scenario, or whatever it might be you can remember. It doesn't have to be exact, just enough to try to help you remember. There's only 40 questions. Maybe you can remember half of them. I don't know. It depends how good your memory is. But what you can do then is after a while, once you kind of get over that initial disappointment of failing the exam, you can then go back and look at your notes. and hopefully you can go back and look them up. And that's basically what I did. So the questions I got wrong, I could remember. I started basically Googling and going through my material and using my test machine, which I'm going to touch on a little bit in a while. But basically figuring out where I went wrong. And for the most part, I was able to work out, which questions I got wrong. Of course, you can also tie the questions in with the percentages as well. Kind of gives you an idea. Now, I think it's fair to say this. Every exam has a pool of questions. That pool of questions might be 100, 200, 500. I don't know what it is. And I honestly don't know for this particular exam. What I do know is there's only 40 questions on this exam. So I don't think this particular pool of questions is a massive amount. And sometimes when you redo an exam, you might get the same question again, or in some case, multiple questions. And that was my scenario. So when I did attempt 2, there were certainly some questions that were repeated themselves. So if you were able to do your homework after the first test, then you knew for sure that you'd probably get those questions right the second time, especially if you went and looked them up. So a little tip for you there. I really hope you never get to that point where you have to do that, but at least it'll give you a really good shot and for the second attempt. So let's talk about attempt 2. So I'm going to go ahead and put my report card up on the screen for you now. So as you can see, over a month later, so I did this on the 8th of March, so there were several reasons for this. One of them, there was a kind of cooling off period that you had to wait so long before you could redo the test again. But the big reason was I focused on 2 other classes that I had to complete to finish my degree program. So I came back to this one and completed this one as my last class, if you like. The other situation here is I could have maybe taken this class a little sooner, but I felt like I needed that extra time just to be 100% sure and comfortable that I was going to pass. I didn't want to have to fail again and then have to wait an extended period of time before I could then attempt my third attempt, if you like. So just a quick look at the results there. You can see I did pretty good on the topic 1 again, but the key areas here are topic 3 and topic 5, 100% in both those areas, and they're both really strongly weighted areas of the exam. If you remember last time, I got 66 and 28. So that was probably the big difference in passing this exam. So let me give you some tips on passing this class. Now, the first one, and this is probably the most important one, is you need to get yourself a copy of the Linux operating system. Now, there's several ways you can do that, and it just depends on what you have available to you. The first one is if you have a pretty powerful desktop or laptop machine, or Windows or Apple, for example, and you have, when I say powerful, like a lot of memory and a fair amount of processor speed available, you can download a virtualization hypervisor. So, for example, something like VirtualBox, I believe, is free, and you can download that. Once you have that, you can then be able to spin up a Linux distribution, and you can choose the distribution that you want to use. And from there, you'll be able to access a Linux operating system from your own personal machine. The other option, and this is what I did personally, is I had an old laptop lying around and I wasn't using. So what I did was basically I wiped it, and then I just loaded or installed a brand new version of Linux Ubuntu onto my laptop, and I basically used that as my operating system. So every time I was going through the labs or answering questions, or wanted to test a command out, I basically pulled my laptop over and tested it. And honestly, that's what I really strongly recommend. You have to immerse yourself in the Linux world, especially if you've got no experience at all. And that's what I did. Now, there are educational videos or instructional videos out there on YouTube. So I'll try and find one and put one in the instructions or the information for you. But just Google it. How do I install a virtualization server, or how do I install Linux? There's lots of websites and videos you can do it. So don't be intimidated by that at all. It's not very difficult. A lot of it's quite intuitive, and it basically talks you through it. But once you have it, it's gold. So other key areas. Go through the material, but focus, if you can, on the LPI material, because like I said to you earlier in the video, this is the official material. They're not going to send you astray. What they say is right. Now, I'm not saying the other stuff's not right from Jason Dion like I used, or even the WGU material. It was fine. It's just that once I focused on the LPI material, I did much better because I was getting it from the source, if you like. The other thing I would say to you is don't underestimate this class. Now, I didn't have any or very little Linux experience at all, and I struggled. This is definitely the hardest class I took, and as you can tell, it took me a while to finally get there. So I think what probably I did wrong was I looked at that 62% pass rate and it only being 40 questions, and it was an operating system, and I've cut my teeth on Windows operating systems over the years. I think I took this class for granted, and I'd say don't do that, because don't make the same mistake I did. Focus on it, make sure you learn everything. Redo the practice exams until you're getting really high scores, but really comfortable, because like I said, it looks a lot easier than it actually is. And the truth is, though, everybody learns different. And this might be one of those classes that you'll just skate through, but this was kind of like my Achilles heel. So that's all I'm saying to you. Focus on this and don't underestimate it. Make sure you focus on the areas that you're struggling in. So every time you do one of those practice exams, if you can clearly see a pattern of areas that you're not strong at, go back to the chapter, reread it again, keep doing the end of chapter exams till you're really comfortable with it. So that's it. That's all I have. Like I said, this wasn't an easy class, but if you focus on it, you're going to be fine. Like I said, my biggest thing was I probably just took it for granted. So I think it's fair to say today's video was a bit of an epic, and I'm sorry about that. I do try and keep these videos relatively short, but there was a lot of information there. So I hope you find it useful. Good luck with your studies. I hope it's going well. Stay safe. I'll talk to you soon.